The VBMS, or the VFBMS, is Fungineers' official VESC BMS. This BMS was developed by both Fungineers and Vetter, the V in VESC, to replace the old BMS and to become the new standard in all Fungineers boards. In this video, I'll be breaking down the Smart BMS's design so that you know what's happening underneath of your feet. Let's get into it. Firstly, what is a BMS? BMS stands for Battery Management System, and it's the washguard and caretaker of your battery. Each of our battery packs are comprised of a bunch of smaller individual cells that act together in unison to power and drive our boards. I won't get too in depth about the specifics of our batteries now, but you can watch this video to understand how they function in our space. Please watch my videos. I work really hard on making these. BMSs help keep us safe by managing our battery packs, keeping them healthy, but also alerting us to critical errors like damaged cells, water inside of the back of the box, or if the structural integrity of the battery pack is compromised. If you don't have access to this critical information, you risk battery fires or accidental cutouts. But having access to all of this information can be extremely overwhelming and dangerous if you don't know what it all means and what to do with it all. So let's change that. A good place to start would be to explain how to install the BMS. Although most of you who watch this won't need this information because your BMSs will already be pre-installed inside of your boards, this is just a good segue into its functions and is useful to know for doing repairs. Before we attach the BMS to our battery pack, we need to configure it first. The VBMS has two states, asleep and awake. In order to plug in the battery to our BMS for the first time, the BMS needs to be pre-configured for its first use. Technically, without anything connected to it, with no XT30, balance wire, or USB, the BMS is off. So let's change that. Let's connect to the VBMS using a USB. We're going to connect via VESC tool. Connect to the BMS and then navigate to the VESC BMS header. Then go to the sleep tab. You'll see a setting in here called block sleep mode. Enable this, then press right. This will block the BMS from going to sleep as we plug it in and configure it. But this needs to be disabled later on or else it'll stay awake and slowly drain your pack. Fortunately for us though, this does automatically turn off now, but it's just a good habit to come back here and check that it's off after we've completed everything. Next, let's configure a few important settings for our battery. First, we're gonna have to set up our IC chip values and our temp sensors. IC chips are sort of the brains of our BMS. They're the ones that handle all the cell monitoring, balancing, voltage sensing, temp sensing, and a bunch of other important things. Our VBMS has two of them, IC1 and IC2. The first IC chip takes care of the first 16 cells, and the second IC chip takes care of the second 16 cells. So 32 cells in total, hence the name VBMS 32 micro. So we must delegate the proper amount of each cells to each IC chip inside of our settings, in accordance to how our battery pack is wired. All right, so this is a bit nerdy, but it's very important. Each IC chip needs at least 3 cells at the minimum to activate and work. So if you have something like an 18S or a 15S pack, the second IC chip won't have enough cells to be able to turn it on. You can get around this to shorting cells or distributing them in some clever ways. But I'm afraid if I go any deeper than this, then I'm going to lose viewership. For Fungineers packs, we have 20S packs and 32S packs, or 18S packs and 27S packs if you consider our conversion kits. So we're gonna set IC1 to 16 and IC2 to 4 for our 20S packs, and we'll set IC1 to 16 and IC2 to 16 for our 32S packs. The second thing that we're gonna need to set up will be our temp sensors, according to what our pack has. Our Fungineers packs and our conversion kit should all have a total of 4 temperature sensors. If you have the improper amount of temp sensors selected and there's one not there, our BMS will take that negative value as infinitely low and the battery pack will think it's too cold to allow charging and will block all charging. There's also a directional order to the temp sensors. They are ranked 1 to 4 from left to right. We are almost done pre-configuring our BMS. I shouldn't have thrown that. The last things we're gonna check will be our CAN, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth settings. Make sure that your CAN ID is set up appropriately. Watch my swaggy video here for a breakdown on what CANBUS is. You don't need Wi-Fi enabled, so you can ignore this, but make sure that your Bluetooth is enabled. You can disable this later once you have the BMS data accessible through the Thor's Bluetooth connection through the CANBUS. Remember to press right at the end once you make all of these changes. Now, let's plug in our battery to the BMS. BMSs of all kind have different procedures for plugging in batteries. Failing to adhere to your BMS's rules can result in bad things like battery fires or straight up killing your BMS. There's no standard for these orders, so be mindful of that. In our case, the VBMS's connection order goes as follows. The battery XT30 first, followed by the lowest balance leads to the highest balance leads. You'll only have 30 seconds to do this, or else it'll time out, so plug these in quick, but do it mindfully. After those are plugged in, you can go ahead and plug in the rest of the wires like your temp sensors, the CAN bus, or the charge port XT30. After the 30 seconds are up, you'll hear an initiation double beep. This is the BMS waking up and saying, hello. There's only 4 ways in which the BMS can be woken up. A charger or voltage on your charge port, 5 volts from the CAN bus from the controller, a USB connection, or the sleep timer. A charger or voltage on the charge port will wake up and keep awake your VBMS. The 5 volt from the CAN bus will do the same. It'll wake up and keep awake your VBMS. The USB will only keep awake your VBMS while it's actively attached to your battery. And the sleep timer will wake up and then immediately put back to sleep the VBMS. More on this later. With the VBMS configured properly and attached to our battery, let's go ahead and make sure that everything looks right. Let's connect back via USB and then connect to the VBMS. On the right-hand side of the page, you will see a button that says BMS. Click this and highlight it blue. Then navigate to the BMS data page. This page should now be populated with all of your cells and a bunch of other BMS data. If your cells are spread out weird and unevenly or just aren't showing up at all, this either means you have wrong IC chip settings or something is completely out of whack with your BMS. If it's the second case, it might be wise to reset the BMS using the terminal up above, or we might need to update and reflash the BMS. So, let me show you how to do that. Our VBMS works very similar to our ESC. It has a base firmware and package information. I go into more detail about this inside of my Intro to VESC video, which you should have watched a while ago. I really hope this isn't your first video and foray into the VESC scene. If it is, please stop and go and watch that. Please, I did a lot of really hard work making that video. It would be cool. In order to update our BMS fully, we're going to need to update our firmware first, then the package. Let's click on our firmware tab on the home page and then click on the included VBMS32 file within VESC Tool. Since it's made by VESC, it's already native inside of VESC Tool. Click the singular upload button and let it do its thing. It'll probably restart after it's done updating, so go back and reconnect to the VBMS. And now let's go into packages. When you're in the package store, press your update archive button so that you have all of the up-to-date files. Select VBMS32 micro. You might have more than one option here, but if you click on one of these options, you will find one that specifically says, for the charge-only Fungineers VBMS, press install package. Doing either of these 2 steps, firmware or packages, will wipe completely all of the pre-configuring we just now did. So after you have this updated, pre-configure it all one more time for your specific battery. An important note is that all of the firmware and packages at the moment are linked to your VESC Tool version that you have downloaded. So make sure that you have the newest version of VESC Tool from the VESC Tool website. This is going to change soon, but I feel it's appropriate to say out loud now. Updating your BMS might not solve all of your issues though. So we do have one nuclear option for being able to wipe the entire slate clean. In order to do this, we're going to need to have the VBMS disconnected from our battery. The disconnection order is the opposite of the connection order. Highest to lowest balance leads first, then followed by the battery's XT30. Then you can go through and disconnect all of the temperature sensors, CAN bus wires, and all that stuff too. Let's just get it completely disconnected. Once it's unplugged, connect back via USB, but don't press connect. Instead, scroll down to the ESP programmer on the left side of the page. Inside of here, press the refresh button so that a port is found. Then press connect. Press on the erase Lisp and QML buttons, then select VBMS 32 micro. Press the single down arrow to reflash the BMS. After it's done, let's disconnect from the BMS. Then all we need to do is update the firmware and the packages like we did in the last step. Then pre-configure it all one more time like we did in the last step. If this doesn't solve any weird issues or quirks that you're having, it's time to get in touch with support. If this has properly set up your BMS, then we're almost done. There's a couple things that we need to do on our ESC side of our board to make sure that everything's working properly. The first step that we want to do is make sure that our ESC knows that we have a VESC BMS connected so that CANBUS can work properly. On our controller, go to Motor CFG BMS and make sure that VESC BMS is selected. Press right. The next step is going to be to set up our CAN status messages. Go to App CFG, General, and then let's scroll to the bottom. Underneath of CAN message rate 2, have status 1 and status 4 selected and make sure that the status message rate is 5 Hertz. With all of these set correctly, now your smart BMS should be able to function correctly with your ESC. With that all out of the way, we're pretty much done, but there are a few more useful tips that I want to be able to share with you. All these will make you a pro with using your VBMS. So let's jump into the tips and functionality setting of this video. An important function that you may want to know how to turn on is how to stop your battery from charging up all the way. Some people may want to do things like this to stop things like excessive regen when at 100% battery, effectively stopping charging at 90% instead of 100%. To do this, go inside of the charging tab. The first two tabs are charge start voltage and charge end voltage. Both of these values are what we would call the BMS release voltage. This is how the BMS will stop charging if one cell overshoots on a charge. The BMS can detect this overshoot and stop charging. So by messing with these two values, we can tell the BMS to limit cell charging to whatever voltage that we want. If we want to limit our battery pack to 90%, this would effectively be 4.16 volts. So let's drop both of these values 0.05 volts. So 4.11 volts and 4.16 volts. Press right, and now your BMS will be limited to charging up your battery pack to 90%. Two other important values to be aware of are going to be your temperature cutoffs. Obviously, these are dependent on your battery pack actually having temperature sensors. So you'll find these underneath of charging, charge temp minimum, and charge temp maximum. Another value that we want to be able to keep our eye out on is going to be the charge minimum voltage value. This value will refuse charging if one of your cells is underneath of the dangerous limits of 2 volts per cell. Balanced starting voltage will allow balancing when there's a difference of 0.015 volts in between cells. Balanced end voltage stops balancing when the threshold of 0.08 volts per cell between cells has been met. Balanced minimum voltage will only allow balancing to occur over this volts per cell. Max balance channels will determine how many cells are allowed to be balancing at one time. If you go inside of the BMS data page, while it's balancing, you'll see some of your cells go from green to orange. That's that value. So while we're talking about balancing, how do we actually get balancing to occur? Balancing can be allowed when those two prior thresholds are met, the cell voltage differences, and if all cells are above 3.5 volts per cell. From here, we can do two things to trigger balancing. We can manually press the button in the BMS data tab, or we can plug in the charger. Once the charger is finished charging, or if the charger detects that we were charging for at least 10 seconds, but we then unplug the charger, finishing the charge, balancing would then kick in. Now just leave it alone and you'll see those cells start to balance. But remember that this takes a very long time as it's draining them with heat. So it may take anywhere from a few days to a week to fully balance. You can see your minimum, maximum, and differences between all of your cells to see how it's progressing along. Here's another useful tip if you're trying to diagnose a bad battery. If you suspect that your battery has a bad cell group, bad welds, or bad balance tabs, you can look inside of this tab and watch your battery actively charge and discharge itself while you use it. The normal operation of a battery is that all of your cells will charge and discharge roughly at the same exact time. They won't be entirely equal, but they'll be in a nice ballpark. But if one is getting really far ahead than the others, or if one is far behind than the others, or if there's just an unequalness across your entire battery pack, then you have a major issue and you need to stop riding. If you continue the ride and continue the charge, you're rolling the dice on whether or not your battery is going to go up in flames. So use this information to your advantage. Once you receive your VBMS unit, you're going to notice that it's very vocal. There's a double beep that'll happen seemingly randomly. And if you look, you'll notice that there's no toggle switch for this beeper. I told you I'd come back to this later. Essentially what is happening is that every 15 seconds, the VBMS is going to turn on to do some light system checks, and then will immediately turn back off. This is happening all the time so that the BMS can consistently monitor itself. But every 1,000 checks, it'll do a slightly longer and deeper system check, which is just long enough to allow the BMS to momentarily initialize. This incurs that initialization double beep, but then it immediately turns itself back off to restart the cycle again. That longer system check happens about every 4 hours, so it's not actually random. The time interval for the system check is actually underneath of the sleep tab. It's called sleep time regular. If this double beep is annoying you, you can change this from its default setting at 15 seconds to a larger number, like something like 999 seconds. Now that light system check is happening every 999 seconds. And after 1,000 of those 999 second interval checks, it'll do that longer, deeper system check. And you'll hear that double beep. But instead of beeping every 4 hours, it'll beep once every 12 days. Much easier on the ears. There is another setting though, and it's called sleep time long. This setting is basically the same, but instead it'll activate when the BMS detects that the battery is less than 5% state of charge. Then it turns on a much deeper slumber to avoid any excess drain or consumption on the BMS's side to prolong your battery's health. This protects your battery from being accidentally drained. But this lengthening of the sleep interval isn't a complete fix for the beeping situation with our BMS, although it will beep every 12 days instead of every 4 hours. But there is one fix that'll completely disable the beeps, but it's much more hands-on. In order to do this, connect to the BMS, and on the left-hand side of the screen, scroll down to Lisp BM. Inside of the screen, go to the search bar and type in beep. Scroll down inside of the code until you find this line of code. Beep, parentheses, 2, 0.1 parentheses. In this line, add a semicolon. This will completely disable the beeps on your board forever. So while editing this video, a beeper disabler option was proposed for the VBMS software. It hasn't been accepted yet, and I don't know if or when this is going to happen, but just in case it does happen, all that rest of that stuff is now useless because there's a beeper disabler option. Maybe. I don't know. Who knows if this is going to be accepted, but it might be in there, so go look, I suppose. Well, if you've made it this far, congrats on not having your attention span fried in our modern day of short form content. Now, you should have a basic understanding of your board's BMS. If you have any other type of issue, I highly recommend jumping into our Discord server so that you can receive hands-on help with your project. And if you wish to learn more about BMSs and batteries, I highly suggest taking a gander at TheBoardGarage's YouTube channel, as he goes much more in depth about how all this functions within our application. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like, and interact with my YouTube channel. I never liked doing call to actions since I've always assumed that if you wanted to interact with my channel, you probably would, but studies have come out saying that even just mentioning it encourages that type of behavior, so maybe I'll try doing a little bit more of that into my future videos. Thanks for watching. Insert catchy sign-off message. Oh, please tell me that recorded. Oh, we're good.